Darkness. It arrived without warning, swallowing the neighborhood one flicker at a time. Streetlights blinked. Televisions sighed. And the hum of everyday life fell into a deep, uneasy quiet, inside one small house at the end of Birchwood Lane. Ethan Cole sat at the dinner table, staring at the half-finished meal cooling on his plate. Across from him, the chair where his wife usually sat was empty. She had texted an hour ago, working late. No emoji. No warmth. Just words that landed like small stones in his chest. The power outage wasn't new. It happened every few weeks in this aging suburb. But tonight, it felt different. Ethan leaned back in his chair, listening to the faint creaks of the house. The refrigerator's low hum had died, leaving behind a kind of silence that pressed against the walls. The air itself seemed heavy, holding things that hadn't been said in years. He reached for his glass of water and caught his own reflection in the window, a blurred outline framed by the last light bleeding out of the sky. He barely recognized the man looking back. There was a time when laughter had filled this space, when Grace's voice echoed from room to room, when their son ran barefoot through the hallway, chasing a dog that barked too loud and loved too much. Back then, the house had rhythm, life, warmth. Now, it was just shelter, four walls holding two people who'd forgotten how to reach each other. Ethan rubbed his temples, remembering how easily silence had crept in. It hadn't arrived as a storm. It came in whispers, missed dinners, empty words, nights spent scrolling through screens instead of looking into each other's eyes. He had told himself for years that things would get better, that every marriage went through quiet seasons. But lately, the quiet had turned cold, and that's the kind of silence that kills a man from the inside, not with noise, but with absence. He stood and walked toward the window, gazing out at the dark street. Every house around him was blacked out, every porch swallowed in the same heavy stillness. Somewhere down the block, a generator coughed to life, and a single porch light flickered on a reminder that the world always finds a way to keep moving, even when your own stops. Ethan exhaled slowly. He thought of Grace, of the woman who used to wait for him at the door, smiling with that tired kindness that said, "I missed you." But lately, her smile had changed, softer, rehearsed, like a courtesy. He'd noticed the small things, new perfume, different clothes, the way her phone never left her hand. But he pushed the thoughts away, because that's what good men do. They trust. They fix what they can and learn to live with what they can't. Then, without warning, the lights came back. The sudden brightness washed over the room, sharp and cold. The hum of the refrigerator returned. The clock ticked again. The air conditioner breathed back to life, and yet, nothing felt alive. The light didn't comfort him. It exposed everything. The dust on the shelves, the stack of unopened mail, the faint outline of a photo on the wall, their wedding day. Once full of promise, now dimmed with time. He stared at it for a long moment. Maybe the darkness hadn't been an interruption. Maybe it was a reflection, a mirror of everything he'd been pretending not to see. Ethan sat back down, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tight. The silence between him and Grace had become louder than any argument could ever be. And as the lights buzzed overhead, he felt the truth settle in like a weight he couldn't set down. Sometimes, silence doesn't mean peace. It means something died quietly, and no one noticed. The next morning, sunlight slid across the kitchen floor, thin, cold, and colorless. Ethan sat at the counter with his coffee, the kind he'd brewed the same way for years, strong, quiet, predictable. Grace moved around the house like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. She was careful now, too careful. Every word measured, every gesture rehearsed. Her perfume was new, something sharp and unfamiliar. Filling the room before she did, She used to smell like vanilla and late nights watching old movies. Now she smelled like the kind of woman who belonged somewhere else. Ethan noticed the difference. But he said nothing. He watched her from behind his cup, the way she smiled at her phone. The way she tilted the screen slightly away when he walked by. "Who's that?" he'd asked once. Gently. Not accusing. Just curious. She laughed, that short, empty laugh that didn't belong to her anymore. "Just work," she said, before leaving the room to answer a message that apparently couldn't wait. He listened to her voice fade down the hallway, soft, low, too intimate to be professional. And still, he stayed quiet, because sometimes silence is easier than truth. The house felt larger lately, not because of space, but because of distance, the kind that grows when two people stop meeting each other halfway. At dinner, they talked about safe things, the weather, the neighbor's new car, their son's upcoming exams. Every sentence was polite. Every smile was borrowed. Ethan would look across the table at her, at the woman he once knew better than himself, and feel a strange ache. Like standing in front of an old photograph that no longer matches the present. He tried to remember the last time they had really laughed together. The last time she had looked at him without calculation. Without distraction. He couldn't. After 18 years, their life had become a calendar of routines. The same streets. The same dinners. The same good nights. Except now, those good nights felt more like goodbyes. One evening, as he tightened a loose pipe under the sink, their son, Ben, leaned against the counter and asked the question Ethan had been dreading. "Dad, are you and Mom okay?" Ethan froze. Wrench in hand, he looked at the boy, 15. Thoughtful. Too observant for his own good. Ben's eyes carried the same quiet understanding his father had mastered. Ethan forced a smile. "We're fine, buddy. Just busy." The boy nodded slowly, pretending to believe it. But he didn't. Kids never do. When Ben left the room, Ethan sat there on the cold tile floor, staring at the dripping pipe he'd just fixed. The water stopped leaking, instantly obedient. Simple. Predictable. He wished people were like that. That marriages were mechanical, something you could tighten, patch, and trust to hold again. But Grace wasn't a pipe. She wasn't broken in a way he could repair. She was drifting. And all he could do was watch. That night, he lay in bed beside her. She scrolled through her phone, the blue glow washing over her face like a shield. He wanted to reach out to touch her hand, to say something that might bring her back. But every time he tried, the words turned to dust in his mouth. So he stayed still, pretending to sleep while she whispered another late-night work call into the dark. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Inside, the silence grew roots. Ethan stared at the ceiling, his jaw tight, his heart tired. "You can fix a broken pipe," he thought. "But you can't fix someone who doesn't want to stay." And as her faint laughter drifted in from the next room, he finally understood the woman lying beside him was no longer his to reach. Friday evening arrived, the way storms do, quietly at first. Grace stood at the bedroom mirror, fastening an earring with slow precision. Ethan watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame, pretending to scroll through his phone. She looked different. Not the soft, familiar woman who spent weekends in worn t-shirts and slippers. Tonight she was polished, electric, every detail deliberate. Her hair curled perfectly at her shoulders. Her lipstick, deep crimson, the kind that announces itself before she even speaks. And the dress, a fitted red that shimmered under the warm light. The same shade she wore the night he proposed nearly 2 decades ago. Except tonight, it didn't look nostalgic. It looked dangerous. Ethan let out a small breath and said quietly, "You look beautiful." She smiled, but not the smile he used to know. This one felt practiced, Professional. The kind you wear at a meeting. Not at home, thanks, she said, adjusting her bracelet. Her eyes never meeting his. He hesitated. Big event tonight. Just a company gala, she replied, almost too casually. It's mandatory. I tried to get out of it, he nodded, glancing at the clock. Need a date. That caught her off guard. She froze for half a second, long enough for him to notice. Then she let out a dry laugh. Light but sharp. Oh. Ethan. It's for staff only. You wouldn't fit in. Her tone was meant to sound teasing. But the pause before it gave her away. He smiled, faintly polite, almost invisible, and said, Right. Of course. She reached for her purse. Spritzed perfume he didn't recognize, and turned toward the door. Don't wait up, she said. He watched her walk away, her heels clicking down the hallway like a countdown. When the front door closed, silence filled the house again. The clock on the wall ticked, steady and cruel. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound seemed to echo the truth he'd been avoiding, that she wasn't just going to a gala. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, though he didn't really taste it. He just needed something to occupy his hands. His mind, however, refused to stay quiet. He replayed her tone, her hesitation, the look in her eyes when he offered to go. That 1 second of panic, it said more than words ever could. Ethan had lived his life trusting people to mean what they said. But tonight, he felt that trust slipping, slow and deliberate, like sand through open fingers. He sat down, eyes on the clock again. The sound grew louder, almost taunting. Time moving forward while his marriage fell behind. 9:30, 10, 10, 15. He tried to distract himself with the TV. But every flicker of light across the screen reminded him of her, the shimmer of the dress, the scent she left behind, the faint echo of her heels on the floor, and something inside him shifted. He didn't feel anger. Not yet. It was something quieter, colder, the need to know, not to argue, not to shout, just to face the truth without filters, without her explanations. He stood, put down his glass, and grabbed his keys from the counter. The night outside was calm. A soft drizzle misted the windshield as he started the car. For years, Ethan had lived by logic, numbers, schedules, patterns, things that made sense. But marriage had never been that simple. Love wasn't something you could calculate. And betrayal, that was the one variable he'd never accounted for. He looked at the road ahead, the city lights glowing in the distance. Somewhere out there, she was smiling, maybe even laughing. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. He was just going to find out the truth. No drama. No scene. Just truth. The hotel shimmered against the skyline, all glass and gold. The kind of place built to make people feel important. Ethan parked across the street. Engine off. Hands resting on the steering wheel. Through the rain-speckled windshield, he watched as luxury cars pulled up, one after another. Women in glittering dresses stepped out. Men in suits guided them through revolving doors. Laughter drifted out each time the doors opened bright. Effortless. False. He sat there for a long moment, breathing slowly. Logic told him to turn around, to go home and let ignorance shield him for one more night. But he'd lived too long in half-truths. Tonight, he needed something real, even if it hurt. He stepped inside the lobby. The air smelled of champagne and polished marble. His shoes clicked softly against the floor. A quiet rhythm beneath the hum of conversation. No one noticed him, just another face in a sea of strangers. That was how he liked it. Invisible. Calm. Watching. From the open doors ahead came the sound of a live band. Soft jazz spilling into the hallway. He followed it, moving toward the ballroom. Inside, the room glowed under chandeliers that looked like captured stars. Women laughed, glasses clinked, and the murmur of ambition filled the air. The world of Grace's new life elegant, distant, untivate. Ethan made his way toward the bar, eyes scanning the crowd with slow precision. Then, he heard it. Two men standing nearby, both in tailored suits. Both grinning like they knew more than they should. Lawson's really taken Grace under his wing. One said, "Word is, she's up for that new director spot." The other chuckled. Under his wing, more like under his spell. They laughed. Clinking glasses. The sound hit Ethan harder than he expected, not because of what they said, but because of how comfortable it sounded. Like it was already common knowledge. He didn't flinch. Didn't react. He just let the words settle. Like ice spreading through his veins, he turned from the bar and began walking through the hall. Past the clusters of smiling faces and empty compliments, he moved slower now. Deliberate. Focused. And then he saw her, at the far side of the room, half hidden, near a private corridor, stood Grace. Her back was turned. But he'd have known her anywhere. She was laughing that easy. Careless laugh he hadn't heard in years. Beside her was a man in a dark gray suit. Mr. Lawson. Mid-50s. Confident. Silver hair perfectly in place. Their bodies were angled toward each other. Too close for business. Her hand brushed his arm as she spoke. And he leaned in. Smiling, the world around Ethan dimmed. The music faded. The crowd blurred. It was just the two of them, her and him, framed in a moment Ethan would never unsee. Lawson bent his head closer, whispering something into her ear. Grace tilted her face up toward him, smiling in that soft, unguarded way Ethan hadn't seen in years. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, Lawson cupped her cheek with practiced familiarity and kissed her. No hesitation. No surprise. Just two people doing something they'd done before. Grace didn't resist. Didn't even look around. She kissed him back slow. Sure. Like she'd already made her choice a long time ago. For Ethan, time stopped. He stood there, hidden in the dim light of the hallway, watching the life he'd built collapse quietly in front of him. There was no explosion of anger. No sudden urge to shout. Only a stillness that felt endless, the kind of silence that comes when pain reaches so deep it can't find a voice. He took out his phone, hands steady, and pressed record. The camera caught it all: her face, her touch, her betrayal made permanent. It wasn't revenge that guided him. It was clarity. Proof. The final nail in something already dead. When he lowered the phone, he didn't move right away. He just stood there, feeling his chest rise and fall, trying to locate the heartbeat beneath the numbness. He thought about how many times he'd fixed broken things: pipes, engines, promises, believing effort could hold them together. But this wasn't something he could fix. She had found peace in the arms of another man, while he'd been trying to keep the walls from falling. And in that quiet, with the laughter of strangers echoing through the halls, he understood the cruelest truth of all. It wasn't jealousy that hurt him. It was the peace she felt while betraying him. The drive home was silent. No music. No radio. Just the steady hum of tires rolling over wet asphalt. The rain had stopped, but the world still glistened: slick streets, reflecting the streetlights like 1,000 small wounds. Ethan's hands rested calmly on the wheel. His mind wasn't racing. It was empty. Clear, the kind of quiet that comes after the storm, inside finally burns itself out. He didn't need to see more. He'd already seen everything. By the time he pulled into the driveway, the neighborhood was asleep. Every house around him glowed with the kind of peace he no longer believed in. Inside, the air felt different: cold, still, almost sterile. The kind of silence that used to bother him now felt fitting. The home wasn't home anymore. It was just a place that had outlived its purpose. He set his keys on the counter and looked around. Every picture frame, every folded blanket, every piece of furniture stood exactly where it always had perfect order. Perfect emptiness. He walked into his office and opened the bottom drawer. The smell of old paper and ink drifted up. Inside lay a folder. Yellowed at the corners, divorce papers. Half finished. Forgotten. He remembered the night they discussed them. Back when Grace had promised to work on things. Back when he still believed promises meant something, but nothing had changed. Not then. Not now. Ethan placed his phone beside the folder. The screen glowed softly in the dark, a small, silent witness to the end of everything. He tapped the screen once. Replaying the video. The image moved her hand on Lawson's chest. That familiar smile. The kiss. He didn't watch for long. Just enough to remind himself it wasn't a nightmare. It was truth. He opened the message window. Attached the video. And typed nothing. No accusation. No question. No anger. Then he pressed send, and that was it. The message delivered with a soft chime that felt final. He didn't wait for a reply. There was nothing left to say. He sat back, staring at the papers in front of him. The signatures. The dates. The unfinished lines where their names should have met for one last time. Now they would. The house creaked softly, a sound he'd once found comforting. Tonight it felt like an echo. A reminder of what was already gone. Ethan leaned back in his chair, breathing slowly. Deliberately, he didn't feel rage. Not satisfaction. Either. Just a strange peace. Because sometimes, closure doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from acceptance, the kind that arrives when you finally stop explaining yourself to people who stopped listening long ago. As the glow from his phone faded, the house fell into darkness again, the same kind of darkness that had started it all. But this time, it didn't frighten him. It felt honest. I didn't need to confront her. His thoughts whispered quietly. The truth didn't need my voice. It didn't take long. Ethan heard the tires screech before the headlights cut across the living room curtains. The door burst open, a moment later, not carefully. Not politely. But with panic. Grace stumbled inside. Breathless. Makeup smeared. Eyes wide. Her phone was still in her hand. The screen glowing with the video he'd sent. She looked at him as if she'd just come face to face with a ghost. Ethan. She gasped. Voice trembling. Please, it's not what you think. He didn't move. Didn't blink. He sat where he always sat, calm. Composed. Anchored in silence. Her words hung in the air. Fragile. Disparate. He let them fall. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Measured, the kind of voice that cuts deeper than any shout. Then explain it to the camera. Grace froze. The sentence hit harder than any accusation. For a long second, she said nothing. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak. But no words came. Her silence said everything. Ethan nodded slowly, not in anger, but in understanding. The kind that comes when denial finally loses its place in the room. He reached to the table beside him and picked up the folder. The same one that had been waiting 2 years for a signature that never came. He laid it gently in front of her. You don't need to apologize, he said quietly. Just sign. Grace stared at the papers, tears forming behind her lashes. Her hands shook. Ethan. It was a mistake. I didn't mean. He stopped her with a look, not cruel. Just final. Yes, he said softly. It was. The words landed like stones. Heavy. Unmoving. She tried again. You're just going to throw away everything over one moment. One moment, he echoed. His tone still calm. You threw it away long before tonight. I'm just acknowledging it. The silence that followed was unbearable, not because it was loud, But because it was true, Grace's breathing hitched. She looked at him, waiting for anger, waiting for the explosion she thought she deserved. But it never came. Ethan's composure. The restraint was worse than fury. It stripped her of excuses, left her standing exposed in the ruins she'd made. He stood slowly, gathering his keys. "I'll come back tomorrow to get my things," he said, his tone flat, almost kind. "You'll have the house to yourself by then." She took a small step forward. "Ethan, please, don't do this. We can fix it." He stopped at the door and looked at her one last time, not with hatred, not with love, but with a kind of tired mercy. "You can't fix what you've already stopped fighting for." Then he left. No door slam. No final word. Just quiet footsteps fading down the hall, the sound of a man reclaiming his peace. Because sometimes dignity speaks louder than revenge, and his silence said everything. Morning came like a confession, slow, gray, unhurried. Ethan sat at the small table in his rented apartment downtown, a mug of coffee steaming beside his laptop. The world outside moved on as if nothing had happened. But for him, everything had changed. He opened the folder on his desktop, the video still waiting. Silent, but alive with proof. He watched it once more. Not to feel the pain again, but to make sure it was real. The camera had captured everything: the closeness, the smile, the kiss, the truth, unfiltered. He clicked forward on a new email to HR department, corporate headquarters. Subject: a matter requiring your attention. He began to type calm. Braces. Professional. Dear board, as the husband betrayed by one of your senior executives, I believe you should be aware of conduct that occurred on company property during your corporate gala. I trust that your stated values apply to all employees equally, including those in leadership positions. Attached is the evidence. Regards, Ethan Cole. He attached the file, read it over once, and pressed send. No hesitation. No bitterness. Just clarity. He closed the laptop and let out a long breath. The quiet afterward felt different, not empty, not heavy, but earned. By noon, the first ripples began to reach him. Lawson was called into an emergency meeting. Within hours, his name vanished from the company's website. Officially, it was a resignation, but everyone knew better. Grace's fall came slower and far more public. Her office was moved, her authority stripped away. Once admired, she now walked through hallways filled with whispers and stares that followed like shadows. Ethan didn't watch it unfold. He didn't need to. Her calls started that evening. First 1, then 3, then 10. Every message said the same thing in different words. Please, let's talk. I made a mistake. You can't just erase everything we built. But he didn't erase it. She had. He simply stopped trying to rewrite what was already gone. He let the phone ring, then go silent. Revenge didn't thrill him. There was no satisfaction in her downfall. What he felt was quieter, steadier, like balance returning to a world that had been tilted for too long. He went for a walk that night, passing families on porches, dogs barking behind fences, the smell of barbecue drifting from backyards. It all felt distant but peaceful. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't crowded with questions or doubts, just stillness. When he got home, Ben was waiting for him, his son, standing by the kitchen counter with that same serious look Ethan used to see in the mirror. "Dad," Ben said quietly. "I heard about Mom." Ethan nodded. "Yeah." The boy hesitated, then walked over and wrapped his arms around him. It wasn't the quick, awkward kind of hug teenagers give. It was real tight, wordless, full of understanding. "I'm proud of you, Dad," he whispered. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling a weight lift that he didn't realize he'd been carrying. All the years of swallowing anger, of choosing patience over pride, they had finally led to this one simple moment. A son who saw strength not in rage, but in restraint. As the sun set beyond the window, a quiet peace filled the room. Ethan smiled, not because he'd won, but because he'd stopped losing. He'd learned that real revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just walks away. And that night, for the first time in a long time, Ethan Cole slept without dreams. 6 months later, the world looked different. Ethan's mornings began with peace instead of pain. The same porch that once felt like a place of waiting had become a place of rest. The air was still cool, the sun climbing slow over the horizon. A mug of coffee steamed in his hand. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to rush anywhere. The house behind him was alive again. Plants filled the windowsills. Music drifted faintly from the radio inside, soft, steady, the kind that matched the rhythm of a life rebuilt. He had painted the walls himself, fixed the gate, replaced the old photos with new ones. Not because he wanted to forget, but because he'd decided to start living again. Grace was gone. The marriage, the memories, the constant ache, all of it had faded into something distant. Something he could finally look at without breaking. What remained was silence. But not the heavy kind that used to haunt him. This silence was clean, free. He took a slow sip of coffee and watched the lights spill across the yard. She thought silence was weakness, he thought. But silence was power waiting for purpose. There was a time when he believed betrayal would define him, that what she'd done would leave a mark too deep to heal. But standing there, watching the morning unfold, he realized something else. Betrayal doesn't define a man. His response does. The truth had spoken louder than any revenge ever could. Ethan had chosen not to destroy her just to walk away. And somehow, that decision had rebuilt him from the inside out. He smiled faintly. The kind of smile that comes from understanding, not victory. Then his voice softened, not to himself this time, but to the ones listening. Brothers, he said quietly, if you were me, would you have forgiven her? Or let the truth speak louder than revenge? He paused, letting the question linger, not as judgment, but as invitation. If this story spoke to you, share your thoughts below. Let's hear your voice, a gentle beat, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every week, we tell stories that remind men like us, losing everything isn't the end. It's the beginning of strength.